Welcome to Flow Stars, candid conversations between Dr. Peter O'Toole and the big hitters of flow cytometry. Brought to you by Beckman Coulter at Bitesize Bio.
Today on Flow Stars, I'm joined by Dave Novo, and he talks about his humble origins of his flow cytometry software company, how inspiring it was to work with the one and only Howard Shapiro, and cooking chicken tikka masala. All this and more coming up in this episode. Hi, I'm Peter O'Toole from the University of York, and welcome to Flow Stars. And today I'm joined by Dave Novo. God, I nearly called you David. Dear me.
Sorry.
I would say usually I'd introduce a guest where they're from, but Dave, you're retired.
I'm retired, semi-retired, yeah.
So,
at this moment.
Are you busier now you're retired than before you retired?
Maybe just as busy, but I am doing things that are a little maybe more interesting to me at the moment with all of that.
I'm sure your company would love to have heard you just say that now it's more interesting. Now you're retired away from it. So I guess maybe to introduce you to the audience a bit more, I guess you're, certainly from my perspective, most famous for software analysis. Would you say that's fair?
Well, considering I'm not really known for anything else at all in the world, then that probably is my by far most well-known thing. My opera singing leaves a lot to be desired. So
you opera sing?
Only in the shower.
Well, we'll get a rendition later. So everyone, you can listen Dave sing some opera. So we know what you're famous for. And with FCS Express, the software side, bringing it all through. I'm going to start slightly different to the others. What was the first job you ever wanted to do? So when you were 8, 9, 10 years of age, what was the first thing you ever imagined being when you grew up?
I mean, my memory doesn't go back that far. I have a terrible memory for the most part. The one thing, though, that I do remember being fascinated by, probably the earliest, was the stock market. And I was maybe like 12 or 11 or something. And my grandfather was always checking his CDs and looking back, I realized he's a very conservative investor, and he was always checking his interest rates and CDs, but he also had some stocks. And at that point, like, you couldn't find anything online. You didn't do anything. So he, not far from where he lived, was a stockbroker. And we would go in once a week to the stockbroker office, this like satellite office, and there'd be like stock ticker going along, and it was all very exciting. And that's the one thing I remember first, as being like, oh, this. And then I learned, the people there taught me about what's an option and what's a stock and what's a put and what's a call. And it seemed like such a fascinating field. And I remember when I was like 13 or so, I put $800 of my own money into Commodore 64 Commodore stock. Yeah. And Commodore subsequently went bankrupt about a year later, and I lost my $800. And that was my took a long pause in my investing after that. But I do remember thinking that would be a really awesome career.
Wow. I'd say you integrated again. You now have some stocks and shares now.
Yes, now I do have. I've sort of dipped back into it again.
So, if that was what you saw at that point, you got burnt at that point. So when did you? What was your next option going forward? What do you think? Oh, I'm not going to be a stockbroker now. I'm going to do something else. What was the next?
Oh, I mean, I'm not one of those people who had, and growing older, I realized there's not many people who actually did have this linear vision and then accomplished their vision and everything went on. I was just a teenager who, whatever sort of came up, I didn't really think too much about my future or whatever at that time. And it really was not until my, early 20s where I started thinking about, what I wanted to do. I did always love science during high school. And I did always think that it would be sort of as a vague thing cool to be a scientist, whatever that meant.
Yeah.
So that did kind of guide an overarching thing, but I didn't have anything really specific.
So what was your first degree in?
My first degree was in biology and pharmacology from McMaster University in Canada, in Hamilton. And again, talking about, sort of non-linear, when I never even, McMaster's not a super famous school or anything, even within Canada, although it's known. But it just had the distinction of being far enough away from home that my parents couldn't visit easily and close enough that I could go home without much trouble. It's about an hour and a half drive from Toronto, where I grew up and where my parents lived. So, that's why I kind of ended up there instead of anywhere else.
So from your undergrad, so you still, I guess, like me, graduating, probably still didn't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, it was all very random. The undergraduate program that I did was a co-op program, and so I did it, and I did some of the co-op work terms, which is basically, it was 5 years instead of 4, but about at the end of it, you had worked for a year and a half in various jobs. And again, I sort of knew that I wanted to, I did think after my undergrad, I was going to go on and do postgraduate studies, but not really where or why or how. But that's when I sort of fell into flow cytometry kind of randomly. And through a whole series of very lucky chances, ended up at UCLA.
And how was that move as a Canadian, going to UCLA?
Oh, it was wonderful. I loved UCLA. It was, as somebody who grew up with 6 months of winter, I mean, you cannot beat. I mean, UCLA is a great school and whatnot, of course, but to be honest, the reason that I even applied there, so I was working with Howard Shapiro at the time, and I'd applied to a bunch of places, including Purdue and whatever, that had well-known flow cytometry programs. But it actually worked out that if you applied to UCLA, the application was $25. And if they wanted you potentially to be part of the program, they would fly you out to LA for a weekend. And it was February in Boston, and I hadn't seen sun for like 3 weeks, and I'd already written all these applications. So I was like, all right, like I changed the name from Purdue to UCLA on the application letter at the time, and sent it in. And fortunately, they asked me to come by, and it was a beautiful weekend in Los Angeles that weekend. And again, it was February, and I'm like, well, if I have to go somewhere for 4 years, there's West Lafayette, Indiana at Purdue, and there's Los Angeles. And so I said, all right, UCLA is a pretty good school, and ended up there. So again, I wish I could say it was because of a concerted evaluation of the intellectual rigor at the various universities, but it really was because Los Angeles has much better weather.
Brilliant. Where do you live now?
Now I still live in Los Angeles.
So you're still enjoying the weather?
I'm still enjoying the weather.
Do you not miss the snow?
We get, there's easy enough here to find snow. There's mountains are an hour and a half away, and really big mountains like Mammoth, like world-class skiing, is like 5 hours away. And I go visit my parents. So I get my 2-3 weeks of snow a year, and that's more than enough. These days, actually, even when I visit my parents, I think because of global warming, I don't even get snow a lot of the time anymore anyway. So
yeah, what was your parents' take when you said, you were only an hour and a half away? It's long enough, far enough away to start with, but then that's quite a big distance. How were they about it?
I imagine they would have preferred me to be closer to home, but I traveled a lot before then, and I think that they were used to me sort of running off, and they like to travel as well, so everybody visited. It wasn't a too big drama.
I'd usually ask who your inspirations are, but you've already mentioned that you were working with Howard Shapiro. I'd imagine he's one of your biggest influences.
Yeah, I mean, and scientifically, absolutely. He's sort of a combination of a, scientific. So I worked with him for about a year almost at his lab in Boston. And, saying his lab is conjures up maybe something grander than what it was. It was him and a wonderful woman named Nancy Perlmutter, who I'm still friends with to this day. And it was the three of us, and that was his lab. So, we saw each other every day in this small environment. We had a lot in common. I mean, Howard was Jewish, Nancy's Jewish, I'm Jewish. So it was this Howard became kind of like a surrogate father/grandfather figure. And I was invited to his house for Jewish holidays and whatever. And it became kind of like, definitely much closer than an employee. I wouldn't say like a son, that's probably a bit much. But, let's say a nephew, maybe is what it turned out to be like. So he was a mentor in many ways.
I unfortunately, obviously, I never got to record with Howard himself. So it would be good just to reflect a little bit. How much guitar playing did you have to listen to?
In the office, it was more or less strictly band. So I didn't have to listen to too much on a day-to-day basis, but definitely wherever we went, he was constantly in demand. And so I did hear live renditions of his songs a lot. He was recording his little album. His son Peter helped him record a CD shortly around the time where I started. So that was I was hearing a little bit of practicing and various editing of the songs then over and over for the first couple of weeks, but that was about it.
That's cool. It's really nice to hear that he was like a father figure, grandfather figure. It's quite nice to hear just, how Warren was welcoming and how the lab wasn't a massive lab.
No, and it wasn't, I think before I came, Howard he had written all his books, obviously, and he did a lot more of his own research. By the time I came, he was doing a lot of contract work for, people would come to him on occasion with very obscure questions about what's the best way to do this and what's the best way to do that. And he would sort of set up a flow cytometer and show some proof of principle that he thought, and then then they would sort of move on. So he did a lot. He helped a lot of people. He wasn't really doing too much of his own research at the time.
So one of Howard's passions was obviously to support AIDS monitoring in Africa and in low middle income countries. Do you think that's also influenced you? Because you obviously you're involved in an open source project to yourself, aren't you?
Yeah, that was Howard's passion towards the end was to basically use super cheap microscopes as much as possible to do some kind of low resolution cytometry for monitoring various diseases. It was interesting to me that, this was like a sort of 10-year, more or less unsuccessful effort of his to try and get large manufacturers to buy into this vision. I've heard various reasons why it didn't happen, and I'm not going to get into.
No.
That's not. But the one thing that I did see, it was interesting, is that I did learn that you can't really. Howard at this point was older. He was not about to start on a major venture on his own. But I did realize that if you go and rely on other people and large organizations, it's like a pipe dream sometimes, where yes, they have infinite resources and so much money and so much talent, but in order to justify moving the giant monster there, you need to have a large incentive. And it's a very, very difficult route to take. And if you want to do something, you got to do it on your own and get things at least to a certain point where you've got some momentum. And then often maybe a bunch of people will jump on the bandwagon after you got to that point. And so talking about the cytometry, I've started a group that's trying to build and design open source flow cytometer for use, among other things, people in the third world who are developing countries who could build it at lower cost. And as a shameless plug, if anybody wants to get involved in that, we can use as much help as we can at opencytometryhardware.org. But I think it's up to us to take it to a certain point, not to just keep going to the manufacturers and trying to pitch the idea, but we need to build it. We need to make it happen. And then once it's there and we've shown that it's useful for various things, then we can talk to other people to hopefully get, more widespread adoption or make it available to more people in more different ways.
Yeah, no, I think it's the right way to go about it. It's not competing with the companies. So
no, we're not making
competition or anything. But at the same time, they're commercial companies. They do have a remit. They are charged with certain tasks. As I guess in the academic world, we're grant funded to do certain research projects, not to then use that funding to do other things with. So it's probably not so dissimilar. But, I think where there's a potential success story, that's when they will come in, I think, because they'll want to be associated with that success. And they can see they won't be burning money, but they'll get something deliverable, positive out of it. So I think it's got a good shout. And I think the open source project itself, I think, is the right time. I think your timing is good. I think Howard was probably a bit premature in the way that people are open-minded to different approaches. Because we're so used to off-the-shelf products with good support that, an open source project you need to be a bit more geeky. But I think with 3D printers now, with software, the way it's driving, it's now not super geeky.
Yeah.
It's within the possibilities of a hobbyist or just someone who's a PhD student who's just starting their PhD can probably put this together. And that makes a big difference. I don't think that was the case even 10 years ago.
No, absolutely not. I mean, Howard was making his own preamplifiers by hand. Now you can upload a spec to China and 2 weeks later you have a board for $12 that they printed just for you. And he was really, you were shopping for the parts and you were scrounging for everything. And he built a lot of, if you needed anything custom, everything was very limited. It's 1,000 times easier today. And that's our vision, is that we can have like this, you can do this today, like come up with an IKEA parts list and say, here's the IKEA parts list. And then with instructions and videos, show how to assemble the IKEA parts list. And you literally don't even have to know how an op amp works. Like you'd have to ideally, how to plug one cable into another cable and plug the thing into the wall and just assemble the parts. And, of course you will have to align it yourself and you will learn really all the little bit of the nuts and bolts, but any person who knows how to operate a screwdriver should be able to use it. I hope.
I think the other part of this, and I'd like to know how far you've got along with the project at the moment. In the microscopy world, you can now buy 3D printed microscopes in flat, but just 3D with a little Raspberry Pi. Running it with a camera lens on it. The lens is the most expensive part, I think, of the whole microscope. So is it a similar ethos to actually, you've got to assume in a lot of low middle income countries, they may not have easy access to 3D printers either. But in this case, it's quite cheap. Just like you said, the IKEA, we can just go to the microscope IKEA and actually sort of order the printed sheets to put together. So I think that's only open flexure certainly works that way. And we've got a couple of open flexures. We put in some open flexures ourselves into different low middle income countries at the moment to see how we can maximize them, because they're still not perfect, but they're good.
Yeah, The open source movement has done well. I mean, I don't remember the names of them off the top of my head because I don't use them. But when researching this, I saw that there's at least 4 or 5. There's like an open light sheet microscopy project. I mean, it's amazing. Flow cytometry is a little more difficult because the electronics component, I mean, we have like, 10 microseconds to acquire a pulse from a cell, and we're trying to get, many thousands of pulses every second. And so the data acquisition requirements and component requirements a little more stringent. You're not going to be able to just 3D print a whole flow cytometer. But you will be able to 3D print many of the components. The idea is that we'll provide, and even Thor Labs and most of these people, for every single part that they have the CAD drawings for that part. You can just download and print that exact part. Of course, it won't be to the specifications and the quality of the machine Thor Labs piece, but often you don't need that. So we hope to have all the parts list up there, and then you can get the 3D printed versions. And we may or may not need custom 3D printed version components, and we'll figure out how to distribute those. So the idea is to make it as cheap as possible, but actually really functional. We're sort of envisioning making 2 models, one for teaching purposes for courses that's like as cheap as possible, but still lets people assemble a fully functioning cytometer.
How cheap is cheap?
That we don't know yet.
What's your target?
Well, I mean, so Suat Dervish made a machine that's probably under $100 for teaching purposes. Okay. It is not including some of the maybe not including one of the PMTs, but he uses APDs and detectors. It's a beautiful piece. We sort of have competing balances because if you make a super cheap machine, super cheap, you can't reuse any of it for the research quality instrument. And we don't have enough resources and people volunteering to build 25 different instruments that are each completely independent. So we're trying to strike a balance between the parts that are difficult to be able to reuse those in both the teaching and research instrument.
Makes sense.
But that'll increase the price, obviously, of the teaching instrument compared to what it could be if we solely designed a teaching one. So, I'm hoping for, under $2,000-$3,000 in parts to make the teaching instrument, and, maybe even cheaper. And then for, under $10,000 in parts to be able to make the research instrument. But we're still sort of looking around and seeing, by research instrument, we're hoping for a 6 to 8 color, thing, 1 or 2 lasers, like nothing super fancy for the first step. But I don't know if we'll push comes to shove, we'll see if that can actually happen.
If you were successful, would you say that would be your greatest achievement, or would you still go back to your software and your baby, essentially, with FCS Express?
I mean, I guess it just depends how many people uptake the cytometer. I mean, if it turns out that, by the time I move on, there are thousands of installations of the open source cytometer. And then the open source cytometer, to be clear, it's not just me. There are and are going to be a lot more people involved in it. But yeah, if it really makes an impact in other people, being significant numbers of people being able to do more science and being able to spread cytometry around at teach about it and whatever, my greatest achievement, I don't know, but I'd be very proud of it, certainly.
You seem very relaxed about it. So now I'm going to take you back in time to when you started your own business. Mm-hmm. I'd imagine right now you wouldn't quite be so calm, and you'd be almost shouting at me with excitement and enthusiasm because you were obviously younger, and it's exciting and it's super edgy because you've got a lot to lose. So, what was it? How did you have the guts to step out and start your own business? And what inspired you to do it? And what were you worried about? I'll get to all 3.
Sure. So it's not as exciting as today, where, people go and they start their thing and they take their whole bank account out and then they get $10 million and they've got 2 years to spend it. And things weren't that crazy when I started. When I started writing the software, I was working for Howard, and it was a very pragmatic thing. The first paper that Howard and I published together, which actually is to date the paper I'm most proud of, even in spite of all the few PhD papers that I published, but was a paper that required us to do a ratiometric analysis of the dyes we were using. And at that time, there was WinMDI, which was a software we used all the time, written by Joe Trotter. It was a free software. And there was WinList, at the time and it was an expensive software. If I remember correctly, it was $3,000 or $4,000 at a time when $3,000 or $4,000 was a lot of money. And Howard wasn't going to buy that to do the analysis. And so we needed something to do this ratiometric analysis of flow data. And I was living in Boston, and like I mentioned, it was me and Nancy. And when I moved to Boston, all I knew of Howard was his book. I'd never met him before. And it said that he was affiliated with Harvard. And so I imagined his lab. Of course, I don't know anything about Boston, and where, all I had was an address, but I imagined, that's on the Harvard campus, and Howard has a lab at Harvard, and there's going to be all these Harvard students and whatever. Howard's lab was not on Harvard campus. It was a good 20-minute walk away. And so I basically knew nobody in Boston, and I was there for about a year and was working a lot. And so basically had a lot of spare time where I didn't know anybody, and spent time writing this tool to make these ratiometric parameters. And then I wanted to plot the ratiometric parameters, and then I wanted to gate the ratiometric parameters. And then so it's slowly evolved, and I worked on this, sort of in my spare time there, which I had a lot of because I didn't have any sort of life. And when I was done at Howard's lab, I realized that I almost had something that was as fully functional as WinMDI. And so I had the summer before I started my PhD in September of 2002 or 2001. And so I worked very hard that summer to sort of polish off as much as I could. And concomitant with starting my PhD, I sent an email to the Purdue mailing list and made a crappy little website about that this software was available. And if you wanted to get it, you could download a copy of the software. So it was actually a very low stress situation for me, because I was doing my PhD and I was starting I had a salary as a PhD, and I was doing it very much as a part-time thing to get beer money and extra money above and beyond.
So were you charging for the downloads?
I was charging for the software. Yeah, if you purchased it after 30 days, it was a whopping $99 at that time for version 1. Paul Robinson was actually, I think, customer number 3. And I think he actually never installed nor used the software for about 20 years until many versions later. He just did it to support some poor putz who was trying to sell flow software on the internet. And I appreciate him for that to this day. And basically I just did it really part-time. There was no stress. If I made $5,000, that means I could go to that many more pubs or bars in LA on top of my whopping grad school salary. And if I didn't make anything, I didn't make anything. There was really no expenses. My mom was a bookkeeper, and she did all the books and everything for the first few years from Canada while I was doing my PhD. But it became, somewhat successful, and people were using it and people were buying it, and it enabled me to travel to conferences. My PhD supervisor was very understanding of me taking time off a couple times a year to go to flow conferences and whatnot. And I went to Cyto, and anything that was sort of close by Los Angeles, I went to and had a little booth and did my thing. And it sort of took off, at least enough that by the end of my PhD, I sort of had a choice of, do I want to continue on in academia, or do I want to give this thing a try full time? And decided to give it a try full time.
So you went, well, I suppose. So you went straight off. You had, I guess, you were already getting some income, but
Yes.
you're not worried that the people who are going to buy it have bought it. So where's your money going to come from? Is it not going to?
Yeah,
You're not worried about that?
That's always the nature of a business, where are you going to get more customers, and you sort of try to make a new version and get customers to upgrade to the new version. Though my major worry was that I really did have a worry that if this thing flopped, because it's, a big jump to go from making an extra $40,000 a year that I could live on as a single person, even without my extra PhD salary, but I could, live with 23 roommates and eat ramen and survive on that. But like, if it didn't really take off and eventually one day be able to support a better lifestyle, it's kind of throwing my academic career in the toilet, because, once you've been gone from academia for however many years, probably not that many, you're never going to get hired back as a postdoc when I finished my PhD 6 years ago and my business flopped. Will you hire me as a postdoc? I knew that wasn't going to happen. So that part was a little bit nerve-wracking, certainly. And what would I do in that event then? And, at the end of the day, I spoke to a bunch of people, including my parents, I remember, and they were just like, you'll figure it out. Like, something's going to happen. And you just sort of have to have faith.
Right. So obviously it worked out well.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any difficult times when actually it wasn't going so well and you're thinking, oh no, you maybe got staff? What were those dark moments of thinking, this is all going to collapse around me? Did you have one of those moments? Any of those moments?
There was in the first we gotten to the point where I had 3 people working for me, and we've gotten to the point where things were, I wouldn't say it was ever like, oh, I couldn't pay the next paycheck, but we didn't see really any way. We had sort of stagnated, and as trying as hard as we might, we didn't see a big path forward. And that was a little bit, oh, what are we going to do? And we were just basically breaking even, given all the salaries and everything. But fortunately, that didn't last for very long. I was really, really lucky. We were at a ASH meeting in San Diego in December. And I don't even remember the year. I'd have to look it up. And a gentleman by the name of Ken Bloom, who was the chief medical officer at US Labs at the time, basically came over and said, hey, we're doing flow cytometry, basically clinical flow. Doctors and hospitals send us for leukemia lymphoma. So the very beginning of sort of outsourcing leukemia lymphoma analysis to third-party flow labs that is now very common here in the US. And it's incredibly inefficient. We're doing analysis in Excel. We're taking it I think they were using a fax scan at the time. So taking it from CellQuest and we're exporting it to Excel, and we're trying to create reports. And from Excel, we paste it into Word, and it's incredibly inefficient. And I see that your software has a whole reporting capability. And if you just add these, 3 features, we'll be able to implement it. And so they actually paid to develop the 3 features that they needed, which had to do with extra reporting features they needed. And they paid well for it, and that saved us a lifeline. And then they bought a license to the software. And then after that, everything was really great, because the other clinical labs saw how it was really a quantum leap in efficiency and quality in terms of what clinical labs were doing. And we were able to really tap into that clinical market in the US, at least, and eventually got registered as a medical device with the FDA, which further made that thing. And so we had a very huge presence in the clinical flow market. And from then on, I was never really worried we were going to go bankrupt, or there was never really a stress.
How many staff did you grow to?
By the time we sold the company a couple of years ago, it was about 25 people. So not huge, but certainly enough to keep me busy. And talking about what's more interesting, it wasn't when we sold that, the flow cytometry and the data analysis part was still really great, and the software development part was really great. But there's just so much BS that goes along with running even a 25-person company that took like 75% of my time. That was completely uninteresting. And everything from, taxes to HR, just administration, tons of administration. Your website is falling apart. This needs to be upgraded. The virus scanners aren't working. And, we're not big enough that we could have a dedicated IT person and a dedicated full-time accountant and a dedicated this and a dedicated that. So I ended up having, 5% of my time involved in a lot of different stuff that wasn't super interesting, really.
But, I just working through this. So would you count yourself as retired now? Sort of.
Not based on my amount of free time, certainly not.
But I've got to ask, how young are you? See, not even how old are you? How young are you?
So I'm 51 right now.
And now into just following your hobbies, your passions in the world.
Yeah, so fortunately for me, my passions sort of dovetail a lot with what I was doing. So I'm still working currently for the company that purchased FCS Express. So I'm still involved with that and helping them out on a sort of consulting basis, and not consulting, but like special projects and questions that they have. And I'm still continuing to do some work for them on a regular basis. But then in my spare time, one thing I definitely am devoting more time to is my health. I have too many friends who are starting, as you get into your 50s, everybody starts developing odd diseases and high blood pressure and this and that. So one of the things I'm definitely focusing on is making sure that I have time to work out and exercise and do all the things that I didn't do for the 30 years I was running the company.
So go on, what's your exercising regime? What are you doing to keep fit?
Oh, quite a bit. So I have bad knees, so it sort of takes a lot of things off the table. But I bike a few times a week, and I swim and do a class at the local fitness place called Orange Theory. Sort of a cardio kind of thing. So I'm trying to keep, at least a few hours a week, just keep in shape and keep all those old age diseases under control.
See, it's interesting. So you've got the bad knees. You always hear people in their 50s who have exercised a lot that blame their exercise on their bad knees. Here you are, having not done much exercise and got bad knees. I think it is just whichever. And if you tried building knee strength up so you can do more?
So on top of my bad knees, I actually tore the meniscus in my knee exercising a year ago. So I've just given up on my knees. But everything else, so I do a lot of biking, which is, sort of strengthens the rest and supposedly will help stabilize all of that. But, what can you do?
So what other hobbies do you have?
So I do, so one of my hobbies now is both my job and my hobby is that I run a small research team, me and a couple people, and we actually do research. And so I love it. It's, there's a lot of ideas came up over the last 20 years or so about different ways of doing things that you can never really pursue because I had a business to run and I didn't really have enough time nor resources to pay somebody to just do research with no economic benefit. But fortunately now I'm in a position where I can do that. So that's a hobby actually. So I do research a few hours a day, maybe, half the day is usually doing different projects. I try to spend more time doing it, but with everything else that's involved, it ends up being 4 or 5 hours. So that's kind of a hobby. Um, again, combines what I really love with not really much stress, although I would like to get some papers out eventually. Which again, when you have no stress, it's the stress of having to publish or perish actually probably is useful for getting things
Yeah.
out the door. I have a tendency to try to keep looking and making it more perfect and more perfect and more perfect and answer every question. And I feel like sometimes you just
Yeah,
have
but
to,
that's not good. You better to do a part A and part B and come out with the first
yeah,
and then follow it up with more. And you know that.
that's what I need advice from more academics to get tell me when to kick the thing out the door and it's good enough. Um and it's funny because in my job and in the company, there was always, nothing was ever perfect. You're always making decisions about when is it good enough to release, when is the documentation good enough, when is the website good enough, because there was really, the longer you dawdled, there was a real economic penalty to it. And with with these projects, I could use some maybe economic penalty a little bit somehow.
I've got an interesting question. So throughout the time with FCS Express, I guess your main competitors were FlowJo.
Correct.
How
Yeah.
competitive did you feel them as competitors, or were you just getting on with your own thing, or did you feel that as competition? And what were your emotions about that? I know what I'd be like. I'd be constantly looking, in a friendly way, if that makes
Uh-huh.
sense. But they,
We definitely always kept an eye on what FloJo was doing. At the beginning, actually, Adam Treaster and I, who was the founder of FloJo along with Mario Roederer, but Adam was sort of working on it full time. We were great friends. At the beginning, um, FloJo was only on, and I still like Adam and think he's wonderful. I haven't seen him in a long time, but FloJo was really on the Mac only, and FCS Express was on the PC. And believe it or not, in the Cyto in Montpellier, we actually shared a booth together, and we both saw our job as trying to fight the entrenched, the CellQuest, and get some of these CellQuest users and others to just switch to one of ours. We didn't really, if you wanted to be a Mac, you were on a Mac, and if you wanted to be on PC, you were on PC. And we had that Cyto in Montpellier, very fond memories of it. We gave away bottles of wine, and we had wine at the booth, and it was a great time. Once FloJo came out with a PC version, it put a damper on the Kumbaya relationship that we had, and we definitely became more competitors. And I will definitely say towards the end, it was certainly frustrating. Again, we had a big clinical market, which we kind of had to ourselves, and that was very allowed things to go stress free. And on the research market, we really were constantly butting our heads against FloJo, and one of the things that was really challenging is you think that scientists are working on the cutting edge. They always want to be new. They always want to be innovative. They're like but scientists are as stodgy as anybody else. And you
yep.
try to take the tools that they're used to and give them something new, and it's out of their cold, dead hands. Can you claw things away sometimes? So
I don't.
I don't know if you've experienced that
Oh,
personally.
so we have both FCS Express and we have FlowJo, because you can't get FlowJo users to use FCS Express.
Mhm.
You just
It's
it
really,
just doesn't. They just
yeah.
they're wed to it.
And one of the things is at the beginning, it was because, oh, FloJo has this feature and we really use this feature, and it has that feature. And over the years, we narrowed down, like we had ways, there were legitimate things that FloJo could do. And if you use those, there was really no way of doing them in FCS Express. But over the years, we winnowed those away one by one by one. And at some point, I realized, okay, it has no longer anything to do with
Hmm.
the lack or not lack of features in the software. It's just, It's just scientists are as stodgy or stodgier than anybody else. And it makes sense. Everybody has stuff to do, and it's really time consuming to learn a new software potentially. Um, and if you've spent 10 years banging your head against a certain wall and now you know how to make that wall do exactly what you want, you're perfectly happy with it. And so, you know, that was definitely a challenge towards the end of trying to figure out what we can do to, because really FlowJo controls such a big part of the market that if you want to grow on the research side, you've got to take users away from FlowJo.
I'm sure there'll be FCS Express users that feel exactly the same way going the other way.
Yeah.
And it is, you're right. And that's also to do with the instruments that they use, or the manufacturer's instruments they use, or a reagent company that they swear by. I think some would actually divorce their partners rather than move from what they're using.
Oh, no, absolutely. And there's network effects. Like, we've had FCS Express users go to a lab and they're like, oh, the whole lab uses FlowJo and nobody will talk to me. Like they won't look at my data. They won't like help me analyze it. They won't do anything. And so, FlowJo, started before us, and they were working full time while I was still in grad school, and got a lot of, and so they had a big head start. And so by the time I decided to go full time, and again, at the beginning, it was just me and a colleague full time, they had an entrenched user base long before we got started. So again, it was just difficult.
Well, we have both. I think the very first one I had was actually, besides WinList and WinMDI using those, I think the first I had was actually FCS Express for ratiometric analysis.
Oh, really?
And pipelining, batch processing lots and lots of data through. So there you are. From back
great.
when we actually started, which FlowJo didn't have a good option for at the time. But then we did get FlowJo as well. And now we got both parties working concurrently. So we talked about difficult times. Would you say that time before you got that contract was the most difficult time in your career, or have there been other more challenging times for other reasons?
No, that was the most difficult time. I mean, it's always been a challenge balancing, certainly balancing family. Like there never really were economic challenges. I mean, I never tried to grow the company beyond my means and take large risks and bring on 50 staff that like, okay, we're going to increase our revenue 10x so that I can pay them. Like I only hired people and did things that we could actually afford to do. And again, it's a different from the VC model right now. It's a very old mom and pop model, where the VC model, that's not enough to grow 15. Like all I needed to do was feed my family and pay my mortgage. Like that's all I really wanted to have. Right. But that's not enough for a VC model these days. And the VC model, you need to like gain 50x like every year, or else you're kicked to the curb. So there's a lot, even if your company is doing exceptionally well, by any standard and growing 15% a year, that's not enough. And you're still under stress in order to get that 50x return, whereas for me, like it was never at the point after that where I couldn't feed myself.
Do you think I'm just reflecting for what you said much earlier and the way you got burnt when you did your first stock market bit. Would you say that's made you also more risk adverse and like to do things conservatively and carefully and within your means, rather than putting all your money on a certain stock and knowing that it could go flat? Do you think that was actually a good lesson at that point?
Yeah, I mean, that may have percolated through in some way. My grandfather owned multiple businesses and liked to talk about them and whatever. And he was a bit of a role model for me in terms of, it's kind of like what you want out of a business, and it's very personal, right? Some people want to be billionaires, and if you want to be a billionaire, you can't do it without, either being exceptionally lucky and being in the right place at the right time, times the power of infinity, which happens occasionally, or you just have to take huge risks. But if your aspiration is not to be a billionaire, and your aspiration is just to have a comfortable life and do something interesting and, then you don't have to go take all those risks. And so you sort of can define up front what your goals really are.
I think you mentioned because family side, and that's important. And you can't. It's a very big risk to go for all out because it would then impact your family as well. So, do you have children?
I have 3 children. Yeah.
So, has any of them followed in your footsteps? What are they all doing?
Well, so they're still a bit young to be following in my footsteps. I don't even think that they know. I think that they could tell you that I do flow cytometry, but they couldn't really tell you what it is.
How old are they?
The oldest is 14 and the youngest is 6. And I have
Okay.
a little one there who's 11.
Now you need to go and ask your 16, 11, and 14, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then they will remember it. When they're in this position, what was the first job that they wanted to do?
Yeah, actually, the middle son in particular is very engineering related. We do have a 3D printer at home, and he loves to print up things, and so he's actually like all excited when we get to the point in the open source project where we're going to print up parts, and he wants to help design them and whatever. So we may get a little flow cytometrist out of it somehow.
I'm going to throw some quick fire questions at you. Are you an early bird or night owl?
By tendency, a night owl. By necessity, and having 3 kids, it's my job to get them to school in the morning. So I'm an early bird most days.
PC or Mac?
Oh, PC.
Now it's always obvious, wasn't it? Considering what we've just been speaking about, that's the most dumb question I think I've ever asked in a quick fire. McDonald's or Burger King?
They're both.
When you've got 3 kids, you've got to go to one.
Yeah, I mean McDonald's. It's gotta be McDonald's, I guess.
What's your go-to when you go to McDonald's?
I guess a Big Mac would be the.
Okay.
I mean, it's not a preferred location, believe that's for sure.
It's not that bad. Tea or coffee?
Sorry?
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Chocolate or cheese?
Cheese.
Beer or wine?
Beer.
Okay.
I feel like I'm going to come out that then after you punch it all on the computer, you're going to be like, 80% chance of being a felon, 20% chance of being homeless based on the.
I can't say what I was going to say. I'll come to it after we stop recording. If you were to go out for dinner and someone was to order, what would be your favorite food to eat out?
Oh, I love Indian food. I really love Indian food.
You must love coming to the UK then.
I love coming to the UK. And in the last site, I was at Rachel Walker's place.
Yeah, down by Abraham, helping on doing a course down there, I think, weren't you, with Rachel?
Yeah. Yeah. And I went into Cambridge every night to eat, even though we were sort of out a little bit where the Babraham is. I went into Cambridge every day just to eat Indian food. And yeah, it was awesome.
Let me flip that the other way. What would be the worst food that could be served in front of you? Yeah, you're an invited speaker. They take you out somewhere. It's a set menu. And what is the worst thing they could put in front of you?
There's not much I won't eat. If I had to be stereotypical, a plate of roasted vegetables or something like that, it wouldn't be bad, but be exceptionally boring. Probably. But there's no real style of food that I don't like.
Okay. Do you prefer to eat in or eat out?
I love to cook.
What's your signature dish?
I make a really mean chicken tikka masala, to be honest.
Okay.
As well as Cajun food. Both because I enjoy that they're very complicated to make. And I do feel like a scientist, you're measuring out 40 different spices and adding them at different times and cooking them. It's not so different from following a protocol in an experiment at that point.
Do you know what? I nailed a chicken tikka patia recently.
Oh, good.
And it's definitely not from recipe because those spices vary in the flavor of them.
Yeah.
Over time, over the batch, and it's constant tasting all the way through. But it's the first time I've actually got it just right. So many times it's okay. I'd rather go to my local.
Sure.
But no,
So that's what I'm missing. So I actually spent some time, and there aren't any, to take a proper Indian cooking class. I need to like rent an Indian grandma from somebody. And because I know there's so much subtlety in terms of like putting the spices in the oil before you cook for
yeah.
exactly the right amount of time. And the oil has to be the right heat and it brings out the flavors. But like, that's hard to figure out on your own is how to do that.
It is. And still later on, you might have to add some more smoked paprika or some more cumin or some more cinnamon or some more coriander or some more. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway,
Now, if there was a like 3 hour a day, once a week Indian cooking class somewhere in Los Angeles, I would 100% take it for, whatever, 6 months and really learn. It's super fun and the food is so good.
TV or book?
It depends. It depends. I love reading and I read a lot.
What sort of
But
genre?
sci-fi fantasy is
Ooh, okay.
is
What
my
about TV? What's your TV sin? What's a go on?
I
Confess
have
to
to
what you can never
say
confess to.
ultra violent movies are like I do love a good action movie with, you know, John Wick level
Okay,
of destruction. And that is a secret pleasure because I have to watch them when my wife's not around because she can't stand them. So it's like really something I got to do if she's like gone away somewhere and I can sneak in an hour. It's
no,
a
it's a good
guilty
action
pleasure.
movie. I can go. That's not bad. So, what is your favorite film?
Um, I think The Shawshank Redemption is
Ooh,
up there as one that I really, really loved. And
okay, that Shawshank Redemption's good. I asked this all year long. What's your favorite Christmas film?
oh, I don't have one.
I
I never got into them.
do.
Coming from a Jewish background, I never got into too much of the.
Oh,
Um,
come on, Die Hard, surely for you.
I'm not going to get drawn into that debate.
Surely that has to be okay. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Um, I'll say Star Trek. Feel it's a little more long lived, and
Okay,
there's lots of different versions.
spectral or mixing or compensation?
Oh, don't get me started, Peter.
That's a quick answer. Quick fire.
They're both one and the same.
That's what Mario said.
Yeah.
I would beg to differ still, subtly, because the additive rather than the subtractive purpose. Favorite color?
Green.
C. Again, not Fitzy, not GFP.
Oh. See, remember, I don't actually run experiments. So all of the stuff's just data. The fact that it came from a dye, a molecule or not, it's a nice coincidence. But
I know you said at the very start that you like opera music. What is your favorite music? What do you listen to?
oh, for real, my favorite music is probably 70s funk, Parliament and James Brown and those sorts of. I mean, again, it dates me, I have to say. I wish it was something a little more modern, but you know, I still think when I'm cooking and you've got some Parliament going on really loud, it's a great day.
That's cool. Do you know what I realised? I've spent too much time chatting to you. I'm sorry. Uh, very quickly, besides Howard, have you had any other inspirations? Who's inspired you in your career or in your life?
Um, from a career point of view, again, although I don't realize it overtly, but I think just the example set by my grandfather
Yep.
certainly as you know, he was a very much like just go out and do it. He also retired at his low 50s, early 50s, after a string of successful businesses in Montreal. Um, and it never, because of him, it never really seemed scary to start a business. It's just like, that's what you do. You start a business.
Yeah.
Like, that's fine. It's not intimidating. It's not like, if he could do it and he's, just my grandfather, it didn't seem very strange, which, sort of from a social point of view, always um it made me appreciate more about sort of your culture and where you're from as the opportunities that you have. And certainly if you don't have those role models and you don't even know, everything seems so intimidating and so scary and so like, but when you just have these role models, they're just normal people and they're not like, uber geniuses or uber whatever. They're just your grandfather. Missing that, I don't know where things are just much more difficult, I think. So,
Yeah, no, my own dad started his own business. And actually, if I think about it, when I was doing my A levels, I probably thought I'd end up running not his business, although he probably wanted me to do that. It was definitely not my cup of tea. But I probably thought I'd have a business. But then when you get into science, that's a lot harder to find a business to start up in science. So I think you've done really well to find a niche and succeed at it.
yeah, and I do. The other thing that I think definitely 100% influenced me is I did a program in the Israeli army when I was 18, and it was a basic training program where we did, basically basic training in the Israeli army. It was a program for foreigners to sort of see what that was like. And while I'm very not non-military and not whatever, but there was a certain attitude there in the army that, you got a job to do. You're given, and this is, I'm sure, universal to all armies everywhere. You're given a job, you're given a task, you're given a time limit, and there's just no excuses. There's no, like, if you have to load up the truck and they give you 4 minutes to do it, like, if you didn't do it in 4 minutes, you ran laps for 30 minutes, and they didn't care and nobody cared. And that was, when you're doing that for months and months and you're getting that attitude, that really stuck with me throughout university and throughout my life is that, you know, you got to set yourself a goal and you can make as many excuses as you want, but at the end of the day, you didn't accomplish what you wanted to accomplish. And that's all that matters at the end. And that's something that really stuck with me. And I think is a big, changed my attitude from the way I was before, certainly, and was certainly a big help in my life in terms of setting goals um, in ways that I could achieve them. Because if you set goals and you just consistently don't achieve them, what's the point? And then on the corollary of like, there's no excuses. Like you set yourself a goal, you just do whatever you have to do to make it happen. And that was, I think, helpful in life and in business. So it wasn't really a person, but that was a big influence.
I've got two more very quick questions because I think we're up to the hour already. If you could do any job in the world for a day or a week, just to try something different, what job would it be?
Oh, an astronaut for sure.
Okay, that's not the first time you've heard that, but not all that common. And do you have any regrets?
No, I don't have any regrets. I mean, there's 10,000 things I could have done differently. And potentially, if I had done those differently, my life could have been better in 500 ways, but they could have been worse, So I don't really believe in regrets. I mean, I haven't murdered anybody. So, I probably regret that. But, within the normal realm of activities, I'm very happy with the way things turned out. I have a wonderful family, a wonderful wife. I'm doing what I love to do. And I always loved, aside from the administrative purpose crap that went on, I always loved what I did. It was never a chore to go to work and deal and meet. I got the opportunity to, because I was selling stuff. I traveled around the world and met almost every single person who's been on the Flow Stars show over the years. And it's such a wonderful community. And I met so many nice people, and people were so supportive and so friendly. And I really have no regrets about nobody I had to deal with was some MBA type that I'm just trying to, schmooze money from. They're all real people who I felt that I was really helping them in their science. And they were all very nice and very appreciative. And to this day, I love going to Cyto in spite of the fact that I have no real need to go. But just to see all the people and to interact with them, it's a wonderful community. So I somehow lucked into what I feel was a great job and a great life.
So I should just to wrap up, actually, do a big thanks, because it is that community and you're very much part of that community. And I think that's interesting, where you have someone who's been more commercially on the scene than academically on the scene, but being very much part of the academic community, if that makes sense. You know, your time and efforts in with Isaac as well, the support that you've given all of us through developing FCS Express as users who wanted you to put new features in, how you responded that, the amount of academic input and impact you've had is not insignificant. And, you know, when you reflect, when you look back, you've been extremely influential on the flow cytometry market, and you should be super proud of that. I'm sure you are super proud of that. But as a flow cytometrist and someone who's used and benefited from FCS Express, a big thanks from me and a big thanks from many other people. So I just before I sign off, just say, please, everyone who's watched or listened, obviously go and have a look at the open source project. And what was the website, Dave?
It was opencytometryhardware.org.
So go and have a look at that, see what's going on with it. You've heard him mention Paul Robinson, Howard Shapiro, and others. Please go back and look at the other Flow Stars. Please do subscribe to the channel. But most of all, Dave, thank you so much for taking your time to join me today. We didn't even get to talk about your courses that you're running, and so please look out for Dave's courses as well. There won't be a better tutor when it comes to data analysis. Dave, thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for having me. It was a great chat.